rain yesterday. They're flooded out.
Julie showed me.
They supposed to get a foot of snow. We end up getting 15 inches of rain.
Julie showed me they had like a ravine here. The water's just rushing down there from the mountains. She said, yeah.
Good evening and welcome to the Defiance City Council meeting for tonight, December 7th, 2021. As always before council, we have a pastor open us up in prayer. Tonight we have Tim Hacker from Bethel. Thanks for being our guest this evening, Pastor Hacker.
Thank you. I'm thrilled. 25 Christmases this Christmas for me in this town. And God can't think of something stupid for you to do. But I thought he did when he told me to come to Defiance because it's so flat here, your dog can run away and 3 days later you can still see his tail wagging. And I grew up in the hills of southern Ohio and I'm a hillbilly. I still am and always will be. Funny thing was, I came to this town and found out there was a whole bunch of hillbillies here. Watching work at Campbell's and John's Manville and GM, and holy cow, you can stand on the street and yell Grundy and somebody knows where that is. That's pretty crazy. But every time I've come to pray, I think without exception, and it's been a lot of prayers over the years, I have prayed for your wisdom. The scripture says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally without reproach, and it will be given to him. And I feel like every time I ask for God to give you guys wisdom, somehow you get it. And I've been here now, I guess, as I say, this is my 25th Christmas, and Defiance is still a great place to live, and it was when I got here, and I've grown to like it. In fact, I even think I like the flat. So I'm just thankful, and I will be praying again that God will continue to do what I think he's answered my prayers over the years with every time, and that is give you guys the wisdom that you need to do what's great for our community. Let's pray. Father, thank you. These are amazing people. You've put them here on purpose, and you can't think of something stupid for them to do, so I ask you to just bless them with understanding. Let the back and forth bring them to better decisions. Let there be wisdom in all that they do, for the sake of our community and for the sake of your kingdom. And this I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
God bless you all.
Thank you, Pastor Hacker. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Let the record show that all members of council are present this evening. And would you stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This evening we get to start with guests from the Montrose Group who are here to inform and update us on the Downtown Redevelopment District. Thanks for being our guest this evening. If you'd like, come on up to the mic and introduce yourselves. And
Go ahead, Jamie. Along.
Leave me alone. I'm going to start it off.
First, and then I get to go.
All right.
We're going to switch it up a little bit.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for allowing us to be with you tonight. My name is Jamie Beyer-Grant. I am the Manager of Economic and Workforce Development with the Montrose Group. And I have Nate Green with me. Nate is a partner and director with the Montrose Group. And we're a Columbus, Ohio-based economic development and lobbying consulting firm. And we have been around for about 13 years now. We're a staff of 5 now, and we do both community development, we do private sector development on the economic development side, and then we have a team that does lobbying work on behalf of communities and other private sector clients throughout the state of Ohio. So our work covers not only Ohio, but it goes beyond the walls of Ohio or the borders of Ohio, and we've done work all throughout the country. So we're pleased to be with you tonight and pleased to have the opportunity to work with the city and the CIC to set up these downtown redevelopment districts. We'll get into that a little bit later, but this downtown redevelopment district concept that the state of Ohio has put in place a few years ago to really help with revitalization efforts and to be able to capture new investments that are happening and use those investments to create new opportunities and improvements into the downtown area. So we're going to talk very high level about kind of the purpose behind the Downtown Redevelopment District program, some of the benefits, some of the ways that the program can be used. And then what we wanted to do tonight is we wanted to kind of show you a draft that Nate and I and Nikki and Erica have worked on what those different districts would look like within the community. And then also to give you guys kind of a sense of how revenues could be used that might be generated off of private sector investments that would be happening in and around those districts in the city. So I think we can go to the next slide, Lisa. You wanna?
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Council President McMaster and members of council, Mayor McCann, and everybody present here for having us here. We're happy to be in Defiance. We love coming to Defiance. We were here in these chambers not too long ago talking about these downtown redevelopment districts. My name is Nate Green. As Jamie said, I'm a partner with the Montrose Group and our Director of Economic Development. Jamie lives in Northwest Ohio. I'm from Northwest Ohio, so we have Northwest Ohio roots, which is a good thing, obviously. But we're here to talk about these downtown redevelopment districts. And so this is the agenda. We're going to go through just the program overview, what it is about. Then we'll get into the specifics of the DRDs here in Defiance that we're proposing. We'll talk about some potential reinvestment sites, and then we'll get into the revenues and open it up for any questions. We have questions at the end, but feel free to ask any questions as we're going through this. If you have any, as I'm talking or Jamie's talking, I talk way too fast, so you might have to yell at me to get me to stop. But please feel free to ask me any questions. So Lisa, go to the next slide. So these downtown redevelopment districts, I'll just kind of I'm going to talk through all these points or talk through some of them. But the Downtown Redevelopment District program, it was a program that in September of 2016, it became law in the state of Ohio. The Ohio legislature decided that it needed these downtown redevelopment district programs as a way to really boost up historic preservation. They are called downtown redevelopment districts. We're going to talk about downtown redevelopment districts in your downtown. They don't have to be in downtowns. It's just kind of, the state of Ohio stole this legislation from Michigan and brought it to Ohio. It's one of the only good things we got from Michigan. I'm an Ohio State fan from Columbus, and they were called downtown districts there, so that's why we call them downtown redevelopment districts here. But they are really, as I talked about, we'll talk about, they're really the genesis, or they're really rooted in historic preservation. And they're rooted in historic preservation, and they're all about boosting investment, trying to make things happen in these historic areas, in these downtown redevelopment districts. What the downtown redevelopment, the ingredients of that, and we'll talk about this a little bit. There's an economic development plan that comes with these downtown redevelopment districts. So it lays out a vision for the future for these areas. It figures out how we inventory current assets, and we say, what are the current assets today? How can we utilize those to make these places even greater than they are today? We enhance existing assets. We want to take the existing, whether they're historic buildings or other buildings in the area, and we can enhance those and try to encourage development. We prioritize a development project list. That's one of the things that Jamie will talk a little bit about. It promotes and encourages development by having this incentive program in place, and then encourage building owners to do more investment. And the other thing it does is it really brings together strong leaders and committed citizens for redevelopment in the area. So those are kind of the broad brushstrokes of what these downtown redevelopment districts are. It's rooted in, and I'll talk about it a little bit, this is really a tax incentive program, but because it's got an economic development plan as part of it, we have all these other great things that we have to do. So Lisa, if you want to go to the next slide. The downtown redevelopment districts, the key components of that, and I talked a little bit about that, but again, these are about historic preservation. So the first thing that we do, and we'll talk about this a little bit, is we have to have, these downtown redevelopment districts. They are 10-acre areas, and they are anchored by an historic district or a building within a historic district. And you have your downtown, you have your historic district here, and we'll talk about how we're going to anchor these downtown redevelopment districts in those in the downtown area. But so again, it's a 10-acre area, and it's anchored by historic buildings. As I said at the outset, it's a tax incentive tool. So we are essentially using the increase in property taxes generated by these buildings, by these investments, to make new investments in the downtown redevelopment district area. We have to have a complete economic development plan. That's something that's part of the legislation when it was passed, that we have to have an economic development plan for these downtown redevelopment district areas. That economic development plan, it identifies investments that are going to happen in the area. It'll identify infrastructure plans in the area. We will model out what the potential for new investment is. We will model out what the potential for new tax revenue is in these areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can use those new DRD revenues for. And in the development plan, we'll specify what the new revenues are going to be used for. And then also the part of the plan is to figure out how we're going to help businesses, help property owners in the DRDs to enhance their buildings, enhance their businesses. As I said, this is a tax incentive. They are, the DRDs, we are taking, or we are redirecting property tax. So new property tax in these downtown redevelopment districts areas, and that's key. The key is this is new property tax. It is an existing property tax, but new property tax in this area. We're going to redirect 70% of that back into the downtown redevelopment districts, and we'll talk about what we can use those for, and we'll do that for 10 to 30 years. We have to negotiate DRD agreements. In some cases, we'll have to negotiate and talk with building owners. If building owners are going to put up a large investment, and that those DRD revenues are going to go back in the building, we have to have an agreement with them. We also, if we go beyond 70% for 10 years, we have to get the school board to approve that DRD tax incentive for the DRDs. And then the other thing we have to do, and this is one of the more just the operational things, we also have to file what's called the DTE 24 forms. Your county auditor knows those DTE 24 forms well. We'll file those DTE 24 forms with the county auditor, and then they go to the tax commissioner down at the state, and the tax commissioner says, yep, we certified those DRDs, and we can start collecting the taxes in those. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So this is, now that I'm looking at this is a little bit hard to see, but this is the mechanics of how we generate revenue in the DRDs. So these DRDs, remember, these are 10-acre areas, and they are 10-acre areas typically filled with existing buildings or potentially buildings where there used to be buildings. The way that we generate revenue in the DRDs is through this mechanism. So first, there is an investment in a building, whatever that may be, $1 million, $500,000, $10 million. There's an investment in that building. That investment, it increases the value of the building. Now that's done again by the county auditor. The auditor will assess what that investment means towards the building value. That building value then generates new property taxes. Because we have a base property tax on that building today, we make an investment in it, and that increase that increment in between increases our property taxes. And 70% of that increment, that new property tax over and above the base, will go into the downtown redevelopment district. And then, and we'll talk about this next, but there are certain things that we can do with those DRD uses of funds. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that because these DRDs are specific to municipalities. Counties cannot set up DRDs. Townships cannot set up DRDs. Only municipalities can set up DRDs. So when we set these up every year, and we'll, if you all decide you want to do this, and we set this up in 2022, in 2023, 2024, we'll start to hopefully see, in 2024, we'll start to see these property taxes come in to the DRDs. And the administration and you all as council will look and go, okay, we set these up. We decided there are these places we have these what we can use the DRD funds for. And as a city, the administration and council, you decide what we're gonna do with those DRD funds. So it is a function of municipal government, and it's a function of the administration and council deciding where those funds are going to go. So Lisa, if you wanna go to the next slide. So I talked about when the DRD, that model of how we generate the DRD revenues. There are 4 things that we can do with those revenues. If you all, I think you have TIFs here, right? For the Walmart, I think, and maybe there's some other ones that you have. So similar to a TIF in a tax increment finance district, you can use tax increment finance district, those increases in property taxes, you can use them for public infrastructure. So similar to a TIF, we can use DRD revenues for a TIF in the DRD area, in the 10 acres. So that's number 1, we can use the DRD revenues for that. Secondly, and the second and third are really the difference. This is the difference about DRDs when you compare them to TIFs. We can fund loans or grants to owners of historic buildings within the DRDs. So buildings that are in the historic district, which are historic, which contribute to the historic district, we can make loans, or we can actually make grants to those building owners directly so that they can use them for the buildings. We can also make loans to owners of non-historic buildings within the districts for building repairs and improvements. And so what that means is that we can make, we can essentially, if it's a historic building in the DRD, we can make a grant to them. If it's a non-historic building that's in one of our DRDs, we can make loans to those entities with these new revenues. And then the third thing, or the fourth thing we can do is that we can take 20% of those new revenues and we can fund organizations, nonprofit organizations that that have an economic development function for those DRDs. We put up here, these are just some examples. It could be a special improvement district or a community improvement corporation. It could be an economic development corporation. It could be another nonprofit. It could be a Main Street organization. Whatever the case may be, it is a nonprofit. We can use 20% of that if we decide as a city that that's what we want to help fund with these DRD revenues. So those are kind of the 4 things that we can do with those revenues when we have them in place. And I think, Lisa, if you want to go to the next slide, I think Jamie, you're back up, right? Oh, we can also, this is delving down into that a little bit. We wanted to give examples of what you can do with those funds. So I talked about loans and grants and public improvements. So we could set up a revolving loan fund, and we could set up a revolving loan fund to help building owners and businesses that are in these DRD areas. We could use the revenues to set up a revolving loan fund. And obviously the revolving loan fund, it revolves. People pay it back. We use the funds. We can use them, it can keep going on for a long time, and we can use those revenues to fund a revolving loan fund. We can also fund it for building improvements. We've got a couple examples up there, but anything that you could kind of think of that's an improvement to the building, we could use the revenues for that. And then we can also make public improvements. We can use it for water and sewer. We could use it for lighting. We could use it for roadways. All the kind of things that you could think of for public improvements. So these are just some of the examples. We can use it for other things too, but we've had some communities that have set up RLFs for it. We've had some that have done it for building improvements and others for public improvements. It just kind of depends what you want to do. In the economic development plan, we typically list all of them, and then as the revenues come in, you can decide what you want to do with those. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judy.
Thank you. Yep. And I think that's one thing that's really important with how you can actually use the DRD proceeds is that, there's a number of different options, but you as a city can really help to guide and determine how you use those revenues. Maybe you want to only set up a revolving loan fund, or maybe you want to put it all to public infrastructure. It really, is at your discretion as to how you use those dollars, for reinvestment into those different districts. So Lisa, you can go to the next slide. So as Nate had said, the districts have to be rooted in either a historic district or have a historic building or structure within the district. So one of the great things that Defiance has is it has a downtown historic district that has already been identified. It has a couple of different districts. You can see the Defiance downtown and then the Holgate property. or the Holgate area, but we really focused on that Defiance downtown area. And it runs from Clinton Street, from the river, all the way down to Arabella Street. And then you can see how it kind of branches off at 2nd Street and 3rd Street. So we can really look at how do we route our 10-acre DRD blocks in and around this Defiance downtown district. So that's really the heart of the DRDs that we looked at setting up, is to really root it in the downtown district, because it already has a historic designation. And so any of those buildings, whether they're on the historic register or not, they're a part of that historic district, and we can capture them and use them in in developing these different DRDs, and then encouraging investment in those DRDs. Lisa, next slide. So that being said, this kind of is our draft of our DRD map for the district. A couple of things I think that are important is what we did is we took that historic district map that was on the last slide, and that was overlaid onto the Google map, and then we built off of that the different DRDs. So you can see the historic district, and I don't know, I can just kind of go over here, but you can kind of see it. It's in peach. It's highlighted right there. So you can see how it kind of goes around and it touches all of those districts that we've created. Okay, so we not only have those districts, but we also have some historic sites that are on the historic register that we wanted to pinpoint, and those are the blue pins that are on the map. So we've both created downtown redevelopment districts within the historic district, like I said, which was our focal point and our anchor, but we also had the property to the south, which is the 1918 building. That's a historic property, and we wanted to make sure that we created a district around that to promote investment and reinvestment on that site. And then just to the east of the river, you can see the green DRD. That's anchored by a historic fire station. And we know that along that corridor, I think it's Ottawa Street, we know along that corridor that there's a potential for redevelopment and a need for redevelopment opportunities to be captured there. So the property up to the north along the Maumee River, that's that's the historic district, one of the historic districts. We didn't actually create a DRD around that because it's wooded property, there's residential property up there, and we really need to make sure with DRDs that it's rooted in mixed use development. So commercial, retail, industrial, residential can be a part of it, but it can't be the primary activity that goes on within that DRD. So that's why we did not set up a district there. So I think we have 11 DRDs that we've created in the downtown, and then to the east of the downtown. We've talked about 10 acres. They're 10 continuous acres. So the way that we drew them is we tried to draw each of these 11 DRDs so that they were no more than 10 continuous acres in size, and that's as outlined in the Ohio Revised Code. So that means, what does continuous mean? It means we have to take into account public right-of-ways. So we can't just count each parcel. We have to count the parcels, the streets. If there's an alley that's a public alley, we have to take that all into consideration when we draw these DRDs. So essentially, if investment were to happen in what in the blue DRD where the 1918 building is, any of those investments and those new real property taxes that are generated off of that capital investment, the 70% of those new real property taxes would be diverted into the DRD revenue fund, and then we could look at how we want to reinvest those dollars in that particular DRD or in a DRD that's kind of ancillary or has a nexus to that particular site. Okay, so we were able to get, like I said, we were able to get 11 of those DRDs to make sure that we brought as many properties in that historic district as we could into the program, and then also accounting for the Ottawa Street corridor as well to spur development or reinvestment activity there. You can go to the next slide. So one of the things that we wanted to do is, and it will be a part of the economic development plan that we have to submit with the legislation and all of the documentation to submit to the state, is we have to project out what we think capital investment is going to be within the DRDs. Bless you. And then what we want to do after that, because what we need to demonstrate to the state is that we have a sense of where the capital investment is, what the anticipated level of that investment is going to be, and then we have an idea of what sorts of revenues have the potential to be created within that DRD district, okay? So that we have a sense of how much money we're going to be able to reinvest in different activities to show that there's benefit in value and it has kind of that transformational impact over the years of the collection of the DRD revenues. So working with Erica and Nikki, we know that we have somewhere around $10 million at least of capital investment that could occur within our DRDs. And $10 million kind of makes a nice, easy round number too for estimate purposes. But if we looked at capturing $10 million in capital investments within the DRDs, what does that mean from a revenue standpoint? So like Nate said, remember, we can only take, per the Ohio Revised Code, we can only take 70% of those new revenues generated and, divert them to the DRD revenue account. So we would project that within all of the 11 districts, if we had $10 million in new investment that occurred, we would see annual projected DRD revenues just shy of $66,000. Now that would be the 70%, okay? 70% of the annual total revenues or the total property taxes would be that $665. So then if we looked at doing a DRD for a 10-year period, it'd be $656,000. If we looked at trying to take that out over a 20-year period, we would see $1.3 million in capital investment or in revenues that could be generated by those capital investments. And then if we took it out for 30 years, we could see just shy of $2 million in new revenues that could be created and reinvested into the downtown. Okay, next slide. So where does that leave us? If we reflect back on the program, DRDs generate revenues. It's a creative way to generate revenues specifically focused on downtown redevelopment priorities. They talked about those elements or ingredients of downtown redevelopment and how we meet the mission for downtown redevelopment. And this is one of the tools that are in our toolbox to really be able to offer something that's different and creative and adds another tool to that toolbox to help small businesses, to help with redevelopment, reinvestment, catalytic projects in the downtown, because the downtowns are the heart and the vibrancy of most communities. They have to be anchored by historic districts or historic sites. We talked a lot about that. Encourages redevelopment of those historic downtowns, the structures that are historic as well as non-historic. And then the great thing is you have the flexibility of reinvesting those DRD revenues in a number of different ways back into the community. So what would be some next steps as we walk away from here is Nate and I would continue to work with Nikki and Erica to kind of firm up those investment projections, because again, we'll need those for the economic development plan. We will develop that DRD business plan or that DRD economic development plan. Nate and I would work to draft ordinances and kind of set a timeline for, meeting with the schools. I know that Erica has already met with the schools and has had some really good conversations with them, but just kind of starting to go through kind of the mechanics of setting the DRD into motion and going through the process of, presenting an ordinance, having its hearings, getting it adopted, answering questions, meeting with stakeholders, notifying property owners, of the intent to create this downtown redevelopment district program. And then at the end of it, we would adopt all of the DRDs as presented, and then we would file that DTE 24 form, which, we had an exclamation point in the PowerPoint presentation because it's so important that you get that form filed, because as soon as that form is filed and taxation has given its blessing on the program, any of those new revenues that then begin to be generated off of investments in that district, can be captured into the DRD program. So we don't want to miss out on that opportunity. So, and that's what Nate and I would do, working, continuing to work with the cities to make sure that we dot our I's, we cross our T's, we keep us on track with timelines, and make sure that, that we're hitting everything on the mark, so that at the end of everything, it's buttoned up, it's submitted to the Department of Taxation, And, we've kind of checked all the boxes and met all the obligations of the program requirements, so. With that, Lisa, you can go to the next slide. We're happy to answer any questions that you have and take any comments, feedback, insights, anything like that. Those DRDs that we set up, they're a draft, they're a work in progress. They can always be massaged as long as we stay within that 10-acre minimum or maximum. So, yeah, John?
My question would be, are you allowed to have more than one DRD? Let's say we plan for 10 acres. Let's say we find another area. Can we have multiple?
Yeah, you could have as many as you
Impossible.
want. Yeah, and there's 9, I think, already that we've. 11.
But
Yeah,
But when
but
you
we
said
can-
11, that 11, is that basically 10 acres of each one? That's 110 acres.
Correct.
Okay.
now what would happen, Nate, if, let's say, 2 years from now, there was an area to the south of town that they wanted to expand and add a new DRD on that we had an anchor historic site for. Can they come back in and set up a future DRD under the program?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can always add on after the initial.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
This is just, I understand this is a great program and it would get the ball rolling, but what's the incentive for the investor? Somebody has to start this project,
Right.
to spend the money to increase the tax revenues. What's the incentive for that?
I mean, there's a possibility. I mean, one of the things you could do is you could say to that building owner that we're gonna redirect those DRD revenues right back in your building. And so that's what we could do. Much like a TIF, a lot of times with the TIF, you're gonna TIF property so they can put public infrastructure around it. This would kind of be similar. We're gonna put the DRD in place that's gonna go directly into that building for them to make improvements to that building. So that would be the incentive. If
Well,
they
this
do that.
program will only work well if people actually come down and spend.
That's exactly right. If we have investments that are happening, and I think you have some of those investments, and we've been working with Nikki and Eric on that. But yeah, that's exactly right. You have to have investment in order for it to really work well.
And I think, Mr. Corbett, we have some folks right now that are willing to make that investment,
Start
to
the
get things
project.
kicked off. And as far as those initial folks, your question, what do they have to gain? A rising tide lifts all boats. And I believe if we get one investor and now funds become available to another building, and the more buildings get done, generally the property values of all those buildings are going to go up. And that's as we look at it.
That's agreed. I understand the concept, but I know it has to start somewhere.
Absolutely.
You already have significant investment being made in your downtown. I mean, there's new people buying buildings, there's people, Dave Grant just put in hundreds of thousands of dollars of work. There's a lot of stuff that's already going on that we need to be capturing to help the next group of people.
Can you capture it though now,
That's what
even
it
though the
is.
project is started already and the
Yes.
money's already been spent, you can go back?
We
And grab
can,
that.
it's something we'll work with the county auditor on, but the goal is when we have it in place, if you all pass this and you approve it, things from that point forward that are in these DRDs that go on the tax rolls after that, then they would qualify.
Well, what's the projected timeline to get it started? If we say, let's go, I mean,
Well, I
obviously.
would say we're probably 40% of the way through the process already.
Yeah, I mean, the rest of it is, there's a public hearing that we have to do. We have to send notices out to all the property owners. We have to we've talked to the school district, but we have to notify the school district. Those two things, there's a 30-day and a 30-day period kind of in between there. So it's probably another 90 days to get it done. So if you all say, yep, we want to go forward with this after talking tonight, then we can move forward with that and have it done, in a few months, or probably 3 months after the start of the year.
So let's say that the DRD was in place and certified by the Department of Taxation in April of next year. And the investments that are occurring right now haven't been completed, but let's say they're completed by March of next year. They're not onto the tax duplicate yet. So you've got that window of time. So we would still be able to capture those new, that increased value because it hadn't yet gone onto the tax duplicate. So that's one of the things that, that we're trying to do.
Okay, so
If we have multiple districts,
are the funds have to be used specifically within each district, or is there a pool for?
That's something we're gonna work with Sean on to kind of determine. There's a gray area in the law. It doesn't really speak to that well. You could just keep it in those 10 areas, or you could decide, since they're all in the same area, we could potentially have the funds go to, be used in all 11 areas, even though they're in different, the investments are in each DRD.
Have there seen any downside for property owners as far as rules and regulations when they try to do some improvements or anything like that?
Not really, because it's, the property owners themselves, if they make an investment, their taxes go up, they're actually still paying the taxes, right? So for them, there's not a downside, there's upside, because they could potentially tap into these funds to, to pay themselves back or make more improvements. There was another part of that question that I don't think I followed.
Anything that would put any new restrictions or regulations?
Oh, there's
anything
not,
they're
no.
trying to do?
It's not. I mean, this is about the property tax, really. So no, this isn't like a historic district where you'd say, okay, the windows have to look this way, and you don't have, or there's a review that doesn't happen. This is really all about the property tax increases.
Are there other municipalities that are currently working with this?
There are. We've worked with 10 or 11. I don't think we have any actually up. Well, in Dark County, in Green County, no, Dark County.
Annie Oakley.
What's that?
Annie Oakley.
Well,
Yeah.
So in Greenville, they have put a bunch in place. They have 9. Versailles did theirs a couple of years ago as well. Athens, the city of Athens has done some. Nelsonville, which is down there.
We're working with
Van Wert, Chillicothe. So yeah, there's a few that have them in place.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one question, Mr. President. You touched on it briefly on the grants versus loans, and that I really like grants.
Grants are better.
I pay them back.
Absolutely.
Loans obviously have to be paid back. And is there a structure that allows us a guideline to determine whether that particular project justifies a grant as opposed to a loan?
So the buildings, by the law, the buildings that are historic are eligible for grants. The buildings that are not historic are not. They're eligible for loans. There is actually there's nothing in the law that says what those loans have to look like. So you can make a determination of how those function.
They could be forgivable.
They could be if those buildings, you could put something in place that says if those buildings meet a certain threshold, whatever that is, certain investment, you tie jobs to it, whatever the case may be, and you say, okay, once that project's done, we'll forgive the loan. You could do that.
Do you have any other follow-up questions for our guests?
Great question.
All right.
Well done.
All right.
Well, thanks for being our guest this
Thank
evening.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the
I think if you don't mind, we'll head out after our presentation if that's okay.
Sure. That's
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you.
With that said, I have reviewed the index minutes for the council meeting of November 23rd, 2021, and find it all in order. But do we have a motion to correct or amend the index minutes as they're presented? Without any, I will sign them. Do we have any liaison meeting requests or reports? And do we have any comments from council this evening? Mr. Hancock.
Yes, leave schedule. Do you know how long we're gonna continue to pick up the leaves? And if someone has some that they just call in and have them pick up? Just curious.
Official leaf collection ended last Friday.
Okay? And if we have some,
The compost site Closed or is open yet this week? The compost site is close to being closed.
I thought it closed last Saturday.
I think you're right, Mr. President. They can call the street department. We will see if we can accommodate them.
Okay, thank you.
Case by case. Actually, they were out picking up leaves this week. This week, I believe, was the last
This week is the
scheduled
last,
week.
okay.
Yep.
Thanks, John.
And also, I've heard a lot of comments about the light strands downtown. And I've heard that we're gonna extend those through to Triangle Park.
I assume the comments you've heard are positive then?
Yes,
Okay.
positive, all positive.
That's what I've
Haven't
heard
heard
as
a negative yet.
We would like to extend them downtown and also down the alleys, to be honest with you. The alleys, the east-west alleys that have been improved. I believe that Kirsty Mack has set up a GoFundMe account of some sort. I'm sure that information is on the DDVB website. And they are a 501c3 or 3C, whichever way it goes. And so those contributions are tax deductible.
Thank you, and I have one other concern. There's a property that on 814 Nicholas. Ask if someone could take a look at that and.
That is probably 2 weeks from being down on the ground.
Wonderful, it has a natural skylight.
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Yeah, those permits have been pulled. Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Wexler?
No, I was going on Nicholas Street.
Sorry, I thought that actually,
I just wanted to make sure I was the same one that they was talking about, or we got the email and stuff
the
on.
county's gonna be taking care of that for us, and we really appreciate that, but, yeah.
It's gonna fall over right before they tear it down.
Yep.
It's leaning.
Yeah, all he's gotta do is maybe,
Good wind.
yeah. Well, we had that yesterday and it's still standing.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes, I've had a couple people call about East Second Street by Kroger's. If we have decided anything about a streetlight or a walkway for pedestrians crossing from the south to the north. Probably around Taco Bell area is what they were wondering about. I guess people have been taking carts from Degler Apartments, going over to Kroger's, and then they take the carts back, and it's been kind of rough for those people to cross the street. And I know we talked about it one other time, but I hadn't heard.
And I looked back that way to see if Nikki was still here, Jill, but the only thing that we've had serious discussion on is extending the sidewalk from basically Dollar General east out to the plaza. An actual crosswalk, north-south crosswalk across East Second Street, we have not discussed
Okay.
with any seriousness that I know, that I recall.
We had that discussion though when the bridge was shut down and we had all that traffic going through there where people, it's absolutely impossible to get across that.
Right, when the bridge was shut down. Nothing discussed since.
Is that a possibility that we could bring that up as a discussion for?
I'll talk to Mrs. Sproul about it tomorrow,
Okay,
but that's also a state route and I don't know how that
State road.
might come into play.
that's what I figured.
I think, in all honesty, the quick answer would probably be, and I know this is unreasonable, would be the expectation that you will go down to the light
Right,
by Zion's and McDonald's and the pizza place and cross there.
right.
But,
But then again, there's no sidewalks that go all
That's
the way down.
right.
So,
And part of that, Mrs. Crutch, is not in the city. So for example, the Kroger is in the city, the Kroger parking lot is not.
correct.
So any type of project would require either annexation or cooperation with the Richland Township.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments from council? Great. I do have a liquor license transfer to River's Edge Bar and Grill LLC, doing business as River's Edge Bar and Grill and Patio at 120 Clinton Street, first floor in Defiance, from Stephen M. Pickens, doing business as Spanky's and Patio, 120 Clinton Street, first floor, also in Defiance. Do we have a motion for a hearing of any sort? Right. Yep. right, with that, we can hear from the Board of Control. Mayor McCann.
Thank you, President Master. I don't really have much, although you kind of jolted my memory there. The helical piers have been placed beneath what is now the River's Edge Bar and Grill. And the next step will be to pour that little foundation and then the wall. And very soon that will be closed in for the winter to allow the work to progress throughout winter. And so I know a lot of folks have been keeping an eye on that project. And that's its status, so we're very pleased with the progress that's been made so far. And that, sir, really is all that I have.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard is out this evening.
He is.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would request a motion for an executive session to consider the appointment, employment, or compensation of a public employee or official. That's Ohio Revised Code 121.22 G1.
All right. Do we have a motion for an executive session this evening?
So moved.
Mr. Hancock? Second, Mr. Mast?
Mr. Engel,
Yes.
Mr. Corbett,
Yes.
Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
Mr. Rusty,
Yes.
Mr. Math,
Yes.
Mr. Wexler,
Yes.
and Mrs. Crouch.
Yes.
After items of legislation and citizens' concern this evening, we'll have one executive session.
Well, I'm glad you asked. I would actually request a motion for an executive session to consider confidential information related to marketing plans, specific business strategy, production techniques, or personal financial statements of an applicant for economic development assistance, where the information is directly related to a request for economic development assistance that involves public infrastructure improvements or the extension of utility services directly related to an economic development project, and the executive session is necessary to protect the interests of the applicant or the possible investment or expenditure of public funds to be made in connection with the economic development project. Ohio Revised Code 121.22 G8.
So moved.
So moved, Mr. Corbett. Second, Mrs. Crutch.
Mr. Hancock,
Yes.
Mr. Rusty,
Yes.
Mr. Math,
Yes.
Mr. Wexler,
Yes.
Mrs. Crouch,
Yes.
Mr. Engel,
Yes.
and Mr. Corbett.
Yes.
All right. We will have a second executive session.
And I have nothing further for you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. And Mr. Leonard.
Just one thing, in Mr. Leonard's absence, I do have a couple of expenditures to report on. And I think that going forward, I will probably serve as the administrator's designee, and I'll probably be reporting these going down into the future. It seems to make sense coming from finance as much as anything else. So, quick reminder. Division heads have the authority to make purchases up to $1,000 on their own authority. The Board of Control approves all purchase orders between $1,000 and $25,000, and anything over $25,000 comes to City Council. When we raised that level to $25,000, it was the council's request that we still report the purchase orders between $15,000 and $25,000 for informational purposes to you. I have two of those tonight. One is for the annual cost of a product we have called Dude Solutions, which is the asset management program that's primarily used by the water and sewer funds. It also has a work order program. The annual cost on that is $21,772. This would be the cost for the 2022 service agreement. And then there is a purchase of Pebble Quick Lime for the water plant from Carmeuse Lime and Stone Incorporated in the amount of $17,550. And that's all I have.
Thank you. We do have 5 items of legislation for consideration. This evening, would you read the caption for the first one, Ms. Elbers?
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the contract for rehabilitation of manholes throughout the sanitary sewer system and declaring an emergency.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. The city hired a consultant who identified 11 of our manholes in our sewer works that have been exposed to hydrogen sulfide sewer gas. buildup, and that buildup could be dangerous for our workers if the manhole covers are not in proper working order. So the city went ahead and held competitive bidding for the refurbishment of these manholes, these 11 manholes, and on November 16th. And Advanced Rehabilitation Technology Limited of Bryan, Ohio, submitted the lowest and best bid of $60,954. That was about $15,000 below the engineer's estimate of probable cost. And your approval tonight of this contract as an emergency ordinance would enable us to meet the 60-day threshold in the Ohio Revised Code, Section 153.12A.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. O'Donnell? Mr. Auguste?
No question, motion to suspend and call.
We have a motion to suspend and call.
Second.
Second, Mr. Corbett.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Crutch.
Second.
Second, Mr. Engel.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
And Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
And this ordinance is adopted.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing the city finance director to contract with Julian Group, Inc. for the performance of professional services.
Mr. Leonard.
Yes, thank you. A little bit of a confusing topic here. So Julian and Grube is an accounting firm out of Columbus, Ohio, who specializes in governmental accounting. They perform audits for many municipalities throughout the state. They have a division that does audits, and they've done our audit for the last 10 years. And they've done our audit at other times prior to that, but they've done it for the last consecutive 10 years. They also have a division, still under the Julian Group name, that has served the city for many, many years that predate me, in which they perform the preparation of our accounting records for audit. We maintain our books on a cash basis. To be audited under the generally accepted accounting principles, they need to be converted to an accrual type basis. We call it the GAAP conversion, generally accepted accounting practices. The GAAP conversion is also done by Julian and Group. And the contract with them most recently was a 3-year contract that just ended. On the auditing side, we've already been notified by the state of Ohio that the state auditor's office will be coming in to perform our 2021 audit next year. Fairly routine. You go for 5 or 10 years with a contract with an independent auditor, then the state comes in for some period of time, and then they allow you to go back to another audit firm. So in 2022, we will not have Julian and Grube as our auditor, but it is my recommendation, and I would like to continue to use them to do the GAAP conversion. And their proposed contract is a 3-year contract at $13,600 per year.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Leonard in these regards?
And with this conversion, Mr. Leonard, the 13,000, that had to go through council's approval instead of the board of control, correct?
3 years. Yeah, so it's 3 years at $13,000 a year, so it's a
Multi-year contract, total over 25, that's why it's before you tonight.
Understand. Thank you.
Mr. Corbett?
No further question. Nope. If there are no more questions, motion to suspend and call. Second.
Motion, Mr. Corbett. Second, Mr. Mast.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
And Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
No. Motion to adopt. Mr. Wexler. Second, Mr. Mast.
Mr. Mass?
Yes.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
And Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
All right. This ordinance is also adopted.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance pertaining to the compensation of non-bargaining personnel during the calendar year 20 2022 and declare an emergency.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you. Each year this time, in conjunction with the budget ordinance, we present to council what we, for shorthand, call the wage ordinance. So as you all know, wages for the police and fire and AFSCME bargaining units are set by contracts which you approve, but they're set for 3-year periods of time. The non-bargaining employees of the city come before you each year in the form of this ordinance. And for the most part, it's an across-the-board increase for all non-bargaining. It's how it's normally presented. We occasionally have a few exceptions that we would like to notify you of. So the broad pay raise that this wage ordinance addresses is the 2.5% that was discussed in our budget discussion for the non-bargaining personnel. That's consistent with wage increases that are in those 3 bargaining units. And this ordinance does carry one exception that we would like to recognize. We have a single position under the heading of network administrator, and we're making the recommendation that that person receive about a $5,000 increase in 2022, which is the equivalent of, say, about an 8.7% increase versus a 2.5% increase. This individual, the person performing these tasks is, quite honestly, he carries it's a one-man operation, fulfilling all of the IT needs of the city, including the water plants, the sewer plants, the police and fire divisions, city hall. It's a tremendous amount of responsibility. We don't think his current compensation is in line with that level of responsibility. And we are pretty sure that it's not really in line with what we'd be earning out in the private sector as well. So Board of Control is recommending that as the lone exception to the 2.5% increase, but that's built in this ordinance as well.
Thank you.
Where's
Mr.
that put him at? Where's that put him to?
That person currently makes $57,700. This would take him to about $62,700.
Mr. Mast?
No further questions, motion to suspend and call.
If we have no other questions. Second, Mr. Engel.
The number is built into the budget, by the way.
Okay.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch?
Yes.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Esty?
Yes.
And Mr. Mass?
Yes.
I forgot that
Motion
whole
to
lingo.
adopt.
Motion to adopt, Mrs.
May
Crutch.
may I interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
I had meant to reference this as well. So the passage of this ordinance, it's obviously directly tied to the next ordinance, which is the 2022 budget ordinance. In years past, we've given first reading of the budget ordinance and given a second and final reading a week from now. Last year, you chose to pass the budget ordinance, all 3 readings in the first night. I don't know what the council's intentions are. I can say the budget ordinance as presented is exactly as we discussed a few weeks ago. There has not been any changes to it, which I think is the first time ever for me. In any event, it would make sense to pass the 2 together. So if you're not sure you want to pass the budget ordinance tonight, I would suggest first reading on this, you pass them both next week. If you're feeling that you might want to pass the next ordinance tonight, then by all means, go ahead and pass this one tonight. They came in a little bit different. It'd been better if they were in reverse order, but that's not Lisa's fault. I didn't point that out to her. So you can go ahead and pass it, but it makes sense to pass the 2 at the same time because they go hand in hand.
So we've thus far had a motion to suspend and call. It's passed.
Second.
Second? Yep, we had a motion to suspend and call.
Now we gotta adopt.
Yeah, and which passed. And now we had a motion to adopt. And you were reading through the.
I never got names
No, we
because
need names.
I need names.
First and
Got it.
second
I
first,
said
and then we need
motion
a
to
second.
adopt.
That's it. Motion to adopt because we were there with Mrs. Crutch.
Aye.
Second, Mr. Hancock.
Okay. Mrs. Crutch,
Yes.
Mr. Engel,
Yes.
Mr. Corbett,
Yes.
Mr. Hancock,
Yes.
Mr. Rusty,
Yes.
Mr. Mass,
Yes.
and Mr. Wexler.
Yes.
I threw everybody off.
So this ordinance is adopted.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance to make appropriation for current expenses and other expenditures of the city of Defiance, Ohio during the period of January 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you. So as I said, the numbers presented in this ordinance are identical to the book you received a couple of weeks ago and that we discussed that evening for 2.5, 3 hours. No changes. That's it.
Mr. Rusty?
We've had two good discussions on the budget. We had some discussions on some items that we thought was important to both council and the administration. I've not heard of any comments that come back basically stating that, any negatives to what we discussed. So based on that, if there's no other comments, motion to suspend and call.
I have one comment.
One comment?
Just one. I probably say this every year, but I don't know that we can all appreciate just how hard Mr. Leonard works on this budget. He starts like in July, meeting with division heads, getting their budgets around and going through those. He meets with all of those division heads individually. Sometimes Mr. O'Donnell's in the room, sometimes Mr. Leonard, sometimes all of us. We discuss it. We discuss it in Board of Control meetings time after time after time after time. And he has quite a system in place that makes it very easy for us to understand when we're talking about individual divisions and their budgets. And I just want to thank John for all his hard work. It is appreciated. Sorry, Mr. Urusky, to kind of interrupt you, but
It makes our job easier too.
Yeah.
So making decisions.
So we have the motion to suspend and call.
Second.
Second, Mr. Corbett?
Mr. Engel,
Yes.
Mr. Corbett,
Yes.
Mr. Hancock,
Yes.
Mr. Rusty,
Yes.
Mr. Mass,
Yes.
Mr. Wexler,
Yes.
and Mrs. Crutch.
Yes.
Motion adopt.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Engel?
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast?
Mr. Hancock,
Yes.
Mr. Rusty,
Yes.
Mr. Mass,
Yes.
Mr. Wexler,
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch,
Yes.
Mr. Engel,
Yes.
and Mr. Corbett.
Yes.
This ordinance is also adopted. And finally for this evening? Yeah.
First reading by caption only, an ordinance authorizing a transfer of funds for the city of Defiance, Ohio for the year ending December 31st, 2021.
Mr. Leonard?
Thank you again. This would be this ordinance represents the transfers that we're recommending for the month of December. So close out the budget year for 2021 and all the budgeted transfers that were incorporated in that. With the exception of the last item, which I'll explain in a second, all of the other amounts, we maintain the flexibility of having this ordinance come to you separately in October, November, and December in case we feel the need to make any changes to these amounts. We haven't changed any of the amounts this year in any of the 3 months, and so the final tally of the transfers will be exactly as was budgeted. The last item on here is a transfer from the wastewater or the water pollution control fund to the streets fund for the cost of it's a cost sharing for street sweeping services throughout the city. The water pollution control fund is a fairly substantial benefactor of the street sweeping program, keeping leaves and debris and things like that out of the storm sewer. So there's a little bit of a chargeback, and that's the only exception to this ordinance. Otherwise, as planned.
Mr. Waxler?
No further question, motion to suspend and call.
Motion to suspend and call.
Second.
Second, Mr. Rusty?
Mr. Rusty,
Yes.
Mr. Mass,
Yes.
Mr. Wexler,
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch,
Yes.
Mr. Engel,
Yes.
Mr. Corbett, and Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
Motion to adopt.
And a motion to adopt, Mr. Engel.
Second.
Second, Mr. Mast.
Mr. Mass,
Yes.
Mr. Wexler,
Yes.
Mrs. Crutch,
Yes.
Mr. Engel,
Yes.
Mr. Corbett,
Yes.
Mr. Rusty,
Yes.
and Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
If I could add one last thing. We're currently working on a supplemental appropriation for the current year to close out the books for 2021. That'll come before council next Tuesday. My presumption, and I think I do this to you every year, President McMaster, my presumption is that next week could very well be the last meeting of the year because of the holidays. That's all for you to decide, but I'm planning on that, so we will have this appropriation ordinance to you next week that should close out any changes I need to see you about for the rest of the year.
Oh, well, thanks for the heads up. Alright. With the items of legislation addressed, we have some time for citizens' concerns before we move on to 2 executive sessions. Do we have any citizens' concerns?
Mike Simon, 2240 Power Dam Road. I wondered why you were building a sidewalk for thousands upon thousands of dollars. Now I know. I couldn't understand why people couldn't just walk down through the parking lot and get into the entrance going back to the park. Kids or adults, bicycles or not. There's speed bumps all over. Nobody's speeding. Now I know why. How many on here know that Our Dam Road is gone? All the way down to Shawnee Drive. It will be Harding Road. Now the county widened Harding Road. Number one, it was a connector road all the way to the end up to South Clinton Street, including Power Dam Road. Now what does ODOT call a connector road? It's a road that connects you from one residence to another. Now, when Harding Road was widened, behind anybody's back, the county turned Harding Road into a high-density road. What is a high-density road? All semis and big trucks. Why does it stop at Shawnee Drive? Because you're going to angle a road in a northwest direction to Kaiser Road. How many know that? Will it bother your sidewalk? No, because you got to understand South Clinton Street and Power Dam Road, there's quite a height. So the road will be built up in the air either on columns, and the sidewalk will go under the columns, or you're going to have a tunnel walkway with the sidewalk. Investigate an alternative truck business route to address the congestion caused by commercial trucks through downtown. City of Defiance Strategic Plan Committee. The city should be responsible for the preparation of a thoroughfare plan. Both the city and the county in joint venture should work to develop the southern bypass. Vacate, construct, and promote roadways to provide better access for the southern route. Finalize the feasibility of adopted route in recommended thoroughfare plan. Consider extending the southern bypass from Road 66 west 24. This should be a joint project between the city, the county, and ODOT. Prepare a city thoroughfare plan and integrate it with the county's thoroughfare plan. Not my writing, city's writing. Now, what is this? Appendix A, federal and state laws and regulations for public involvement.
We have about 1 minute left.
You wanna know why I'm being lied to and the people in this town are being lied to? They should know. They're our government. Specific sets of regulations require ODOT to involve the public as part of the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, of 1969. Process to provide public notice of NEPA relation public meetings, public hearings, availability of environmental documents in order to provide information to those persons and agencies who may be interested in or affected by the proposed project. The environmental information is to be available to the public officials, citizens, before decisions are made and before actions are taken. The information must be of high quality. It is not better documents, but better decisions that count. NEPA's purpose is not to generate paperwork or even excellent paperwork, but to foster excellent action. The understanding of the environmental consequences.
Thank you for being our guest this evening, Mr. Simon. It's an interesting point that needs to be taken. However, citizens' concerns are limited to 5 minutes.
Why are we being lied to? Why are we being lied to? You're going to send a highway with trucks, semis, right by a splash pad, right by a school. What is the environmental effect?
These are all interesting points that should be looked
And
into.
the other points are, as under state law,
However,
under
your time for
state law,
citizens' concerns
you are to
is up, and I would like to politely ask you to remove yourself. It's time for us to move on.
I want to know why, under Ohio state law, the law stipulates that ODOT
Mr. Simon,
will notify
you know that your time is
the
up.
general community.
You're welcome to
of
come back at
proposed
almost any
project
time.
And offer opportunity. Why are you
Mr.
doing
Simon,
this?
I believe I've been clear and polite. Now, you know before you came up to speak that you were given 5 minutes. You're a tried and true person who has come before us several
Do you know why
times.
people are being lied to in this town?
It is time to go. Thank you.
Apparently it's not.
Are there any other citizens' concerns before we move on? With that, we can stretch our legs for a few minutes before we enter executive session.